The gunshot had long faded from the crisp Michigan air when Thomas Richardson first heard it, a sound no experienced hunter could mistake. Not another rifle's report, but the desperate, feeble whimpers of young animals in distress. Standing motionless among the towering pines of Blackridge Forest, Tom felt his heart quicken as he recognized what those sounds meant. Somewhere nearby, wolf cubs were alone, hungry and unlikely to survive the brutal late winter without their mother. In his 25 years of hunting these woods, Tom had followed one unbreakable rule above all others: never, under any circumstances, interfere with predator young. But as the weak cries persisted through the gathering dusk, the veteran hunter faced a decision that would challenge everything he believed about the wilderness and reveal a truth about wolves that would astonish even the most seasoned wildlife experts. Thomas Richardson hadn't come to Blackridge Forest seeking wolves that March afternoon. His weathered face, etched with lines earned through decades in the wilderness, remained focused on tracking the white-tailed deer whose population he helped monitor for the local conservation department. At 48, Tom had evolved from the brash young trophy hunter he'd once been into something of a local legend in the small town of Pinecrest. A man who understood the forest's rhythms and respected its inhabitants with almost spiritual devotion. His transformation had come gradually, shaped by countless dawns spent observing rather than pursuing, by listening to the forest's subtle languages rather than disrupting them. These days, he hunted primarily for sustenance and spent more time guiding wildlife photographers and researchers than fellow hunters. His cabin walls, once decorated with mounted heads, now displayed intricate sketches of living animals and detailed maps of their territories and migration patterns. The residents of Pinecrest had varying opinions about Tom's evolution. Some older hunters dismissed his conservation concerns as softness, while others sought his unparalleled knowledge of animal behavior and terrain. The local wildlife officer, Bobby Wilson, often consulted Tom on predator movements, particularly regarding the northern grey wolves that had been reintroduced to the region 15 years earlier. Tom's understanding of these wolves had become especially nuanced. He could identify individual packs by their tracks alone, predict their hunting patterns based on subtle environmental cues, and navigate their territories without disturbing them. This knowledge had proven invaluable during the recent harsh winter, which had stretched well into March and decimated the deer population that wolves relied upon for survival. That particular afternoon, Tom had been checking the trail cameras he maintained in cooperation with Dr. Emma Lawson, a wildlife biologist studying predator-prey dynamics in northern Michigan. The data they collected had recently shown concerning trends: wolves traveling unusually far for diminishing returns, pack structures destabilizing as hunger took its toll. Tom had been following one set of wolf tracks that showed signs of injury, the animal's gait indicating possible malnourishment or illness. As dusk approached and crystalline frost began forming on the forest floor, Tom had prepared to head back to his cabin. Then he heard it, faint but unmistakable, the high-pitched whimpering of wolf cubs, too young to hunt, too inexperienced to survive alone. 25 years in these woods had taught him to interpret such sounds with painful accuracy. These cubs were starving. Blackridge Forest in early March existed in a state of cruel contradiction, technically spring on the calendar, but still firmly in winter's grasp. The towering pines and scattered hardwoods stood starkly against grey skies, their branches occasionally shedding burdens of snow with sudden, startling crashes. The forest floor remained largely frozen, covered with a crust of ice and snow that cracked beneath Tom's careful footsteps despite his practiced movements. This transitional period was always difficult for Blackridge's wildlife. Natural food sources had been depleted through the long winter months, yet spring's renewal remained weeks away. For predators like wolves, whose survival depended on successfully hunting increasingly scarce prey, it represented the most challenging time of year. The wolf pack that claimed this northeastern section of Blackridge had been particularly hard hit, according to Tom's recent observations. As he carefully followed the sound of the cubs whimpering, Tom navigated through dense Pine Valley, a section of forest so thick with close-growing conifers that perpetual twilight reigned even at midday. Few hunters ventured here, finding the disorienting similarity of the endless trees and challenging terrain not worth the effort. For wolves, however, this impenetrable section provided crucial denning habitat, safe from human intrusion. The fading daylight filtered through the dense canopy in weak, slanting beams as Tom moved deeper into the valley. His experienced eye noted the subtle signs of wolf presence: tufts of fur caught on low branches, territorial markings, and the occasional remains of small prey. But something felt wrong. These indicators were older than they should be, suggesting the adult wolves had not returned to this area recently. The temperature dropped noticeably as shadows lengthened. Tom's breath formed clouds in the frigid air as he paused to listen again. The cubs' cries had grown more distinct, emanating from a ravine carved by the seasonal creek that locals called Old Mill Run. In full spring, this watershed would become a rushing torrent, but now it existed as little more than a trickle beneath partially thawed ice. Following the increasingly desperate sounds, Tom approached the edge of the ravine with the caution of someone well aware of the dangers that awaited those who moved carelessly in wolf territory. The steep banks dropped nearly 15 feet to the creek bed below, where exposed tree roots created a natural latticework along the eroded soil. Carefully selecting a descent route, Tom made his way down, hyper-aware that each step took him closer to breaking the most fundamental rule of wilderness survival. Every hunter who ventured into Blackridge Forest lived by certain immutable principles, passed down through generations and reinforced by hard experience. Chief among these was the absolute prohibition against approaching predator young, especially wolf cubs. Never come between a mother wolf and her babies wasn't merely advice, it was a survival covenant written in the blood of those who had violated it. Tom himself had helped instill this rule in countless novice hunters, recounting his grandfather's harrowing experience with an enraged mother wolf that had left the old man with permanent scars and a profound respect for predator maternal instinct. Wolf mothers were known to fight beyond all sense of self-preservation when their young were threatened, becoming the most dangerous force in the forest despite their general avoidance of human contact. This principle served dual purposes: protecting humans from attack and preventing human scent from causing den abandonment, which almost certainly doomed vulnerable cubs. The Wildlife Conservation Department emphasized this rule above all others in their public education efforts, and even veteran hunters like Tom maintained a reverent distance from known denning sites. As he neared the source of the whimpering, Tom's internal alarm bells rang with increasing urgency. Everything he knew about wilderness survival warned against his current actions. His hand instinctively touched the canister of bear spray on his belt, effective against wolves as well, but little comfort if he found himself between a mother wolf and her cubs. The mental calculation of risk versus potential reward dominated his thoughts as he rounded a bend in the ravine and finally located the source of the desperate cries. What Tom discovered in the deepening shadows of the ravine stopped him cold. 3 wolf cubs, no more than 3 weeks old, huddled together in a shallow depression beneath an overhanging bank. Their normally plump bodies appeared gaunt, their movements weak and uncoordinated as they pawed at the frozen ground and whimpered pathetically. Even from several yards away, Tom could see their protruding ribs and dull coats, classic signs of starvation. The cubs' condition told a story more clearly than any tracking sign. Their mother had not returned for a significant time, perhaps days, based on their deteriorated state. Tom scanned the surrounding area, his experienced eye noting details others might miss. A short distance upstream, partially concealed by fallen branches, lay the answer: the body of an adult female wolf. Even from this distance, Tom could see the entry wound where a bullet had struck her shoulder and the trail of blood that marked her final journey toward her cubs before collapse. Poaching. Despite the gray wolf's protected status in Michigan, illegal hunting continued, particularly from those who viewed wolves as threats to livestock or competitors for game animals. Tom felt a familiar anger rise within him, coupled with profound sadness. The mother had managed to travel nearly half a mile after being shot, driven by the instinct to return to her cubs, only to die within hearing distance of the den she could never reach. A cursory examination of the immediate area revealed no tracks of other adult wolves. This suggested the dire truth of the situation. These cubs belonged to a splinter pair from the main pack, perhaps forced to establish a separate territory due to this winter's scarcity of prey. Without the structure of a full pack, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The father wouldn't continue caring for the cubs alone. He would likely rejoin the main pack or seek a new mate. As Tom observed the weakening cubs, his ranger's knowledge provided the brutal calculation. Without intervention, these cubs would be dead within 24 hours. They were too young to travel, too inexperienced to hunt, and too weak already to survive the freezing night temperatures. Their deaths were all but certain, a harsh reality of nature made more tragic by the human interference that had created this specific situation. Tom stood motionless as conflicting imperatives waged war within him. Every principle of wildlife management argued against intervention. Nature's way was to let the cubs succumb. Their deaths would be part of the forest's brutal cycle. Wolves had survived as a species for millennia without human assistance, and many wildlife experts advocated strict non-interference policies, arguing that survival of the fittest maintained the health of wild populations. His professional training reinforced this stance. Bobby Wilson, the conservation officer, had explicitly warned against playing God with predator populations. Once you start deciding which animals live or die, Bobby had told him, you're not preserving wilderness anymore, you're running a zoo without walls. This philosophy had guided wildlife management in Blackridge for decades, yet something deeper pulled against these established principles. The cubs were orphaned not through natural predation or disease, but by an illegal human act. Their mother hadn't fallen to the natural order, but to a poacher's bullet. Did that human interference justify human intervention to correct its consequences? Tom's thoughts turned to his daughter Sarah, who worked at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in Traverse City. She dealt with the consequences of human impact on wildlife daily and had often challenged her father's non-interference stance. We've already interfered with every natural system on the planet, she would argue. Sometimes the most natural thing we can do is try to restore the balance we've disrupted. As one of the cubs attempted to stand and immediately collapsed in weakness, Tom felt the weight of decision pressing upon him. Intervention meant potentially months of specialized care at a facility equipped to handle wolf cubs without habituating them to humans. A complicated prospect with uncertain outcomes. It meant challenging the wisdom that had guided his relationship with the wilderness for decades. Non-intervention meant certain death for the cubs, accepting that their starvation was simply part of nature's plan, despite the unnatural cause of their orphaning. It meant walking away and allowing the consequences of poaching to cascade through the ecosystem. Thomas Richardson, who had spent a lifetime learning the rules of the wilderness, now faced the moment that would test not just his knowledge, but his wisdom. The cubs whimpered again, weaker now as the forest grew darker around them. The decision crystallized not through logical analysis, but through a moment of clarity that felt almost like communication from the forest itself. These cubs deserved a chance, not because nature demanded it, but because their mother had been robbed of her life by human hands. The scales of natural justice had already been tipped by the poacher's bullet. Perhaps they could be balanced by a hunter's compassion. Tom knew that what he was about to do carried significant risks and challenges. Wolf rehabilitation required specialized facilities to prevent human imprinting, which would make the cubs unable to return to the wild. The nearest qualified facility was Dr. Lawson's research station, nearly 20 miles south of Blackridge. Getting 3 starving wolf cubs safely there before they succumbed to hunger or hypothermia would require immediate action and careful planning. With methodical movements that belied his internal turmoil, Tom shed his heavy hunting jacket and laid it on the frozen ground. From his pack, he retrieved the emergency space blanket he carried for wilderness emergencies and spread it atop the jacket, creating an improvised transport sled. Each action was measured, each decision weighed against his extensive knowledge of wildlife handling. The cubs watched him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, too weak to flee, but still possessing their natural wariness of humans. Tom knew that minimizing stress was crucial to their survival chances, speaking in a low, steady voice, not because the cubs would understand his words, but because the consistent, calm tone might soothe them. He prepared for the most dangerous. Part of his plan, actually handling the wild predators. From his pack, Tom produced the thick leather gloves he used for processing firewood, the best protection available against the cubs' small but still sharp teeth. He laid out the beef jerky he carried for emergencies, knowing that while not ideal for wolves, it might provide enough immediate calories to sustain them during transport. A water bottle modified with his knife provided a makeshift dropper for hydration. Taking a deep breath, Tom committed fully to his chosen path. The moment his hands made contact with these wild creatures, there would be no turning back. He would become responsible for their lives in a way that transcended the normal relationship between humans and wilderness. It was a responsibility he never sought, but one he now accepted with the same quiet resolve that characterized his approach to the forest he loved. With careful movements born from years stalking wildlife, Tom approached the weakened cubs. Despite their deteriorated condition, handling young predators presented significant challenges. Even starving wolf cubs possessed sharp teeth and the instinctive response to bite when threatened. Their fear of humans, an essential survival trait, would trigger defensive responses despite their desperate situation. Tom's approach followed a careful protocol he'd developed through years of occasionally handling injured wildlife. Moving slowly, he kept his body profile low and avoided direct eye contact, which wolves interpret as aggression. He spoke continuously, in a low, monotonous voice, establishing an audio pattern that, while not comforting to the wild animals, at least provided consistency they could process. The space between human and wolf cubs seemed to stretch impossibly as Tom closed the final distance. The largest cub, likely the most dominant of the litter, summoned its remaining strength to bare tiny teeth and emit a weak growl. The sound carried the genetic memory of thousands of generations of wolves, a species whose relationship with humans had been defined by conflict as often as coexistence. Tom knew that quick, decisive movement would actually cause less stress than prolonged approach. When he was within reaching distance, he moved with sudden efficiency, grasping the first cub by the scruff of its neck, the same way its mother would carry it. The cub's instinctive response was to go limp, though it whimpered in protest. Placing this first cub on the makeshift transport blanket, Tom repeated the process with its siblings. Each handling represented a moment of tension, a potential for injury to either human or animal. The second cub attempted a weak bite that fell short of Tom's gloved hand. The third, the smallest and weakest, offered no resistance at all, a concerning sign of how close to death it had come. Once all 3 cubs were secured on the transport sled, Tom offered water first, using his makeshift dropper to provide hydration without risking aspiration. The cubs accepted this intervention with desperate thirst, another sign of their dire condition. Small pieces of jerky followed, which they initially sniffed suspiciously before their hunger overcame caution. Gathering the corners of the space, blanket to create a secure bundle, Tom faced his next challenge, the steep ascent from the ravine with his precious, precarious cargo. Each step required careful balance and distribution of weight to avoid jarring the weakened cubs or losing footing on the frozen slope. The physical exertion of the climb, combined with the emotional weight of his decision, left Tom breathless at the ravine's edge. Checking the cubs quickly to ensure they remained stable, he oriented himself toward the long journey ahead. His cabin lay 5 miles to the west, the first stop on a much longer journey to Dr. Lawson's facility. As Tom secured his bundle more comfortably for transport and began walking with measured strides through the darkening forest, he remained acutely aware of the most dangerous possibility ahead. Somewhere in these woods, the cub's father or other pack members might catch the scent of the young wolves or the human who carried them. The potential for encountering adult wolves turned every shadow between the trees into a possible threat, every sound into a warning of approach. Tom had covered nearly 2 miles of difficult terrain, his precious bundle growing heavier with each step, when he first sensed the change in the forest's rhythm around him. Experienced woodsmen develop an almost supernatural awareness of their surroundings, noticing subtle shifts that signal danger before conscious recognition occurs. Something was following him. Pausing beneath a massive white pine, Tom carefully lowered the cubs to the ground and scanned the forest behind him. The almost full moon cast sufficient light through the trees to create a patchwork of blue-white illumination and deep shadow across the forest floor. Within one of those pools of darkness, something moved with deliberate purpose. The massive, grey wolf emerged into a shaft of moonlight with silent precision, its yellow eyes fixed unwaveringly on Tom and the bundle at his feet. This was no malnourished creature. The male stood nearly 3 feet at the shoulder, his winter coat thick and his posture conveying power and intent. The alpha male, the father. Tom's blood ran cold with the realization. The confrontation he had feared since lifting the first cub was now unfolding in the worst possible circumstances, halfway between safety points in failing light with no defensive position available. His hand moved slowly toward the bear spray on his belt, though he questioned whether he could deploy it effectively before the wolf closed the 15 yards between them. The alpha male's awareness seemed focused not on Tom, but on the scent and sounds coming from the bundle. The cubs, sensing the presence of an adult wolf, had begun whimpering with renewed energy. Their cries created a visible effect in the alpha's posture, a momentary confusion that disrupted its stalking approach. Tom remained absolutely motionless, understanding that running would trigger the wolf's chase instinct, while aggressive movement might provoke attack. His mind raced through options, none offering clear salvation. The standoff stretched for long seconds, hunter and predator evaluating each other with the intensity that comes from mutual recognition of a worthy adversary. When the wolf resumed its approach, it moved with the confidence of an apex predator, on familiar territory, yet something in its movement pattern struck Tom as unusual. Rather than the direct predatory stalk he expected, the wolf's path curved slightly, almost as if attempting to circle toward the cubs while maintaining distance from the human. Understanding bloomed in Tom's mind with sudden clarity. The wolf wasn't stalking him as prey. It was attempting to assess the situation with its offspring. This realization offered no immediate comfort, as a wolf protecting its young could be more dangerous than one seeking a meal, but it shifted the dynamic of their confrontation. With agonizing slowness, Tom crouched beside the bundle of cubs, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The wolf stopped its advance, watching with evident calculation as Tom partially unwrapped the space blanket, exposing the whimpering cubs to both the cold air and their father's view. The alpha's reaction was immediate and profound. Its posture shifted from aggression to intense interest, ears forward and head lowered. The cubs' response was equally dramatic, their weakened bodies attempting to squirm toward the adult wolf, their whimpers taking on a different quality that even human ears could recognize as recognition. Tom faced the most counterintuitive moment of his wilderness career. Every instinct screamed to protect the vulnerable cubs from the approaching predator, yet his knowledge of wolf behavior suggested an impossible alternative. That the father, wolf's interest might represent not danger, but possibility. What happened next would challenge Tom's understanding of wolf behavior and rewrite his conception of the boundaries between wild and human. The alpha male approached the bundle of cubs with careful steps, his attention now focused entirely on his offspring, rather than the human crouched nearby. Each movement conveyed not aggression, but intense concern, his nose working constantly to process the condition of the cubs. When he reached the edge of the space blanket, close enough that Tom could see the individual hairs of his thick winter coat, the wolf did something remarkable. Rather than attempting to drag the cubs away or threatening Tom, he began methodically inspecting each cub, nudging them gently with his nose and making soft vocalizations that seemed to comfort the weakened youngsters. Tom remained frozen in a place, bearing witness to behavior that contradicted conventional understanding of how wolves react to humans handling their young. The expected aggression was entirely absent, replaced by what appeared to be a recognition of the cubs' desperate situation and Tom's role in their immediate survival. Most astonishing was what the alpha did next. After thoroughly examining his offspring, the massive wolf turned his attention directly to Tom. Their eyes met with an intensity that transcended the normal boundaries between species. In that gaze, Tom sensed not merely animal intelligence, but a depth of awareness that felt almost like communication. The wolf then did something that would have seemed impossible in any wilderness training manual. He backed away several steps, sat on his haunches, and waited, his eyes moving between Tom and the cubs in a pattern that conveyed unmistakable meaning, an invitation to continue what had been started. Tom's wilderness-trained mind struggled to process this unprecedented behavior. Wolves, particularly alpha males, didn't surrender their young to humans or demonstrate trust toward hunters. Yet the evidence before his eyes contradicted everything he'd been taught about predator behavior. This wolf, somehow, appeared to understand that its cubs needed help beyond what it could provide. With movements that felt dreamlike in their unreality, Tom rewrapped the cubs and slowly stood. The alpha wolf remained seated, watching intently, but making no move, to either approach or retreat. Tom took one experimental step in the direction of his cabin, then another. The wolf rose and paced alongside, maintaining a distance of about 10 yards, close enough to monitor, but far enough to indicate non-aggression. This extraordinary procession continued through the moonlit forest. A hunter carrying wolf cubs, accompanied by their father in an arrangement that defied natural order, yet somehow felt ancient in its synchronicity. Tom's practical mind sought rational explanations. Perhaps the wolf recognized the cub's desperate condition and was temporarily tolerating human intervention. Or maybe the alpha had been partially habituated to human presence through Dr. Lawson's research activities. Yet, none of these explanations fully captured the profound nature of what was unfolding. With each step toward his cabin, Tom felt the boundaries between human and wild dissolving, replaced by something more primal and true than the artificial separations created by modern understanding. The unlikely alliance between hunter and wolf continued all the way to Tom's cabin, where the real work of saving the cubs began. Using knowledge gained from Sarah's wildlife rehabilitation work and instructions delivered via satellite phone from Dr. Lawson, Tom established a makeshift care station in his tool shed, separate from human living space to minimize imprinting. Concerns. The alpha wolf's behavior continued to defy conventional understanding. Rather than disappearing once the cubs were secured, he established a position at the edge of the clearing around Tom's cabin, maintaining a constant vigil. His presence created practical challenges for Tom's emergency care efforts, but also provided unexpected benefits. When the cubs initially refused the milk replacement formula Dr. Lawson had suggested, Tom observed the alpha regurgitating food for the cubs in the wild, a normal wolf behavior for feeding young. Inspired, he modified the formula's presentation, warming it and offering it in a way that more closely mimicked natural feeding. The cubs accepted this approach, taking their first significant nutrition since their mother's death. Throughout the long night, Tom worked tirelessly to stabilize the cub's condition. The smallest remained concerning, its body temperature fluctuating despite the warming packs Tom had prepared. During a particularly worrying moment, when this runt seemed to be fading, Tom noticed the alpha wolf had moved closer to the shed, its attention fixed on the struggling cub with evident concern. Following an instinct that transcended training, Tom carefully brought the weakened cub outside, wrapping it securely, but allowing the alpha visual and scent access. The wolf approached with surprising gentleness, licking the cub's face and body with focused attention. Whether through physical stimulation, familiar scent, or some deeper connection, the cub responded to this interaction, becoming more alert and responsive. This pattern of collaborative care continued for 3 remarkable days. Bobby Wilson, arriving on the second day to assess the situation before transport to proper facilities, stood speechless at the sight of Tom and the alpha, wolf working in their separate but synchronized ways to care for the vulnerable cubs. In 30 years of wildlife management, I've never seen anything like this, Bobby admitted, as they watched the alpha wolf patrol the perimeter of the clearing, periodically approaching to check on his offspring. Everything we know about wolf behavior says this shouldn't be happening. Dr. Lawson arrived on the 3rd day with proper transport equipment and a team prepared for the delicate task of moving the cubs to her research facility. Her scientific mind immediately began documenting the unprecedented behavior of the alpha wolf, particularly its apparent understanding of the human role in its cubs' survival. This challenges our entire conception of wolf cognition and social behavior, she explained while preparing the cubs for transport. The father seems to comprehend not just that you're helping, but how you're helping. That level of situational understanding goes beyond what we've attributed to even our most intelligent wild predators. The most extraordinary moment came as the cubs, now stabilized and strengthening, were being loaded into Dr. Lawson's transport vehicle. The alpha wolf approached closer than ever before, showing no aggression toward the team despite their handling of his offspring. He watched the careful loading process with evident attention, his eyes tracking each cub as it was transferred. Then, in a gesture that would forever alter Tom's relationship with the wilderness, the massive predator turned to face him directly. Their eyes met across the clearing, predator and hunter, connected by something that transcended words or scientific explanation. The wolf held this gaze for long moments before turning and melting into the forest with silent dignity. 3 weeks after the cubs were transferred to Dr. Lawson's research facility, Tom was completing his morning coffee on the cabin porch when movement at the forest's edge caught his attention. The alpha wolf had returned, but not alone. Behind Him, maintaining cautious distance, stood three other adult wolves, members of his pack who had previously never ventured this close to human habitation. The alpha approached with now familiar confidence, carrying something in his mouth. Tom remained motionless as the wolf crossed the clearing and placed his offering on the bottom porch step, a freshly killed rabbit, laid out with deliberate care. Without waiting for response, the wolf retreated to join his packmates at the forest's edge. The implications of this gesture overwhelmed Tom's attempts at rational explanation. Wolves had been documented caching food and retrieving it later, but intentionally delivering prey to a human contradicted all natural behavior patterns. It represented not just recognition, but something deeper, something that could only be described as gratitude. Bobby Wilson, notified of this development, arrived to witness subsequent visits. The alpha and varying members of his pack began making regular appearances near Tom's cabin, never threatening, but maintaining a presence that felt like an ongoing connection. Trail cameras captured extraordinary footage of wolves leaving small prey animals, behaviors that baffled wildlife experts consulted by Dr. Lawson's team. "We're witnessing something unprecedented," Dr. Lawson explained during one of her visits to collect camera data. "This pack seems to have recognized you as something neither prey nor predator nor competitor, but as some form of ally. They're demonstrating reciprocity, a concept we've rarely seen directed from wild predators toward humans." As spring finally began transforming Blackridge Forest, the visits continued with evolving patterns. The wolves never approached when other humans were present, showing a discernment that suggested remarkable observational intelligence. They maintained awareness of the cabin's surroundings, but showed no aggression toward Tom's occasional visitors, simply disappearing until the unknown humans departed. Most remarkable was the day, nearly 2 months after the rescue, when a familiar sound drew Tom to his porch at dawn. There, at the clearing's edge, stood the alpha wolf, accompanied by Dr. Lawson's transport vehicle. The research team had arrived to attempt the first phase of reintroduction, bringing the now healthy cubs to a controlled release site near their father's territory. As the cubs were carefully removed from their transport crates, their father maintained his position, watching with evident attention. The cubs, now substantially larger and healthier, initially hesitated at the unfamiliar forest surroundings. Their time in human care had not erased their wild nature, but it had created uncertainty about their transition back to natural habitat. The alpha's response demonstrated intelligence that transcended instinct. Rather than immediately collecting his offspring, he approached them slowly, engaging them with the same careful interactions Tom had observed during their first reunion. After these reintroductions, he led them in a careful circuit of the clearing's edge, seemingly demonstrating territory boundaries and safety parameters. When the alpha finally guided his cubs toward the forest depths, he paused at the tree line. Turning back toward Tom, the wolf displayed a behavior Dr. Lawson would later describe in her research papers as unprecedented cross-species acknowledgement. He stood tall, directly facing the human who had saved his offspring, in a posture that conveyed not submission, but mutual respect between equals. The moment stretched between them, hunter and predator, connected by an experience that had transformed both their lives. Then, with a final lingering look, the alpha led his reunited family into the depths of Blackridge Forest, leaving Tom with an understanding of the natural world that few humans had ever achieved. The story of Thomas Richardson and the wolf pack of Blackridge Forest might have ended there, an extraordinary moment of cross-species cooperation followed by natural separation. But nature, like wilderness, follows no human expectations. Throughout that spring and into summer, evidence of the wolves' continued connection to Tom emerged in ways that challenged scientific explanation. His regular forest patrols occasionally intersected with the pack's movements, encounters that would normally send wolves retreating into cover. Instead, the alpha and his pack would often parallel Tom's route, visible through the trees but maintaining their wild distance. Trail cameras captured remarkable footage of the three cubs, growing rapidly under their father's guidance, developing hunting, skills and pack behaviors. Their survival rates exceeded typical expectations for orphaned and rehabilitated predators, suggesting the unique circumstances of their rescue and reintroduction had created optimal conditions for their development. Most extraordinary were the discoveries Tom began finding near his regular forest resting spots. Small objects placed with seeming deliberation at locations only he frequented. A distinctive white stone at the base of his favorite lookout tree. Unusual feathers arranged at the creek crossing he used weekly, each item positioned in ways that appeared intentional rather than random natural distribution. Dr. Lawson's research team documented these phenomena with scientific rigor, but struggled to frame explanations that satisfied academic requirements for evidence. The behaviors suggested levels of cognitive complexity and cross-species communication, previously unattributed to even the most intelligent wild predators. We're witnessing something that challenges our entire framework for understanding wolf cognition, Dr. Lawson admitted during a presentation to visiting wildlife biologists. These behaviors suggest not just intelligence, but a form of abstract thinking, the ability to understand that objects have significance beyond immediate utility, that they can convey meaning between different species. The connection extended beyond mere curiosity to practical cooperation. When illegal trapping was discovered in the northern section of Blackridge, Tom found himself guided to the locations by wolves that approached his cabin and led him through specific travel routes. Behavior that Bobby Wilson initially dismissed as coincidence until the pattern repeated with undeniable consistency. By midsummer, wildlife officials from across the region had become aware of the extraordinary relationship developing between Tom Richardson and the wolves of Blackridge Forest. Some dismissed the accounts as exaggerations or anthropomorphism. Others, witnessing the interactions firsthand, began reconsidering fundamental assumptions about predator behavior and human-wildlife relationships. The cubs, now nearly adolescent in development, occasionally appeared at the forest's edge when Tom was alone at his cabin. Their behavior showed appropriate wild wariness, but also unmistakable recognition. They maintained the critical distance necessary for their proper development as wild predators, yet clearly distinguished Tom from other humans they encountered. This delicate balance, wild yet connected, represented something profound that transcended conventional classifications of human-animal relationships. The wolves remained fully wild, hunting naturally and avoiding general human contact. Yet they had incorporated Tom into their understanding of their world in a way that created a bridge between separate spheres of existence. As summer transitioned to fall, the story of Thomas Richardson and the wolves of Blackridge Forest began spreading beyond the immediate community. Dr. Lawson's preliminary research papers generated significant scientific interest, while Bobby Wilson's department used the case to develop new approaches to predator management that incorporated more nuanced understanding of wolf behavior. For Tom himself, the experience transformed much more than his understanding of wolves. His relationship with the entire forest had fundamentally shifted, moving from the traditional hunter-wilderness dynamic to something deeper and more symbiotic. He began declining hunting tags, focusing instead on photography and research assistance that allowed him to document the extraordinary behaviors he was privileged to witness. "I used to think I understood this forest," Tom explained to a small group of wildlife management students visiting Dr. Lawson's research station. "Now I realize I was just scratching the surface. These wolves don't just survive here, they think. They solve problems, they remember, they connect. Maybe they always have, and we just weren't paying attention properly." The wolf cubs, growing into their adult roles within the pack, continued developing normally despite their unusual early history. Their successful integration into wild wolf society while maintaining their unique connection to Tom challenged conventional rehabilitation wisdom, which had long held that predators needed complete human separation to properly return to natural behaviors. Dr. Lawson's research team began documenting similar, if less dramatic, instances of wolf behavioral flexibility throughout the region. These cases suggested that the Blackridge situation, while exceptional in degree, represented natural capabilities rather than anomalous behavior. Wolves, it seemed, possessed cognitive abilities and behavioral adaptability far beyond what had been previously recognized. For the broader Pinecrest community, the ongoing story created ripple effects that transformed local attitudes toward predator conservation. Tom's experiences, shared thoughtfully with fellow hunters and landowners, offered a new perspective on living alongside apex predators. Several locals who had previously supported predator control measures became advocates for more nuanced approaches to human-wildlife coexistence. Perhaps most profoundly, Tom's relationship with the wolves offered a living example of what many indigenous cultures had maintained for centuries, that the boundaries between human and wild existed more in human perception than in natural reality. The wolves of Blackridge, through their extraordinary responses to human intervention, had demonstrated that cooperation, rather than domination, could define our relationship with the natural world. As fall colors began painting Blackridge Forest, in brilliant hues, Tom sat on his cabin porch, watching the sunset cast long shadows through the trees. The past months had transformed him in ways he couldn't have imagined that fateful March evening. His relationship with the wolves continued, evolving, defying conventional understanding, yet feeling increasingly natural with each passing week. The alpha male now regularly appeared at dawn or dusk, sometimes alone, sometimes with select pack members, maintaining a respectful distance that honored both his wild nature and their unique connection. Tonight, however, something felt different. Tom sensed a change in the forest's energy, a subtle shift in the rhythm of evening sounds that his decades of wilderness experience had taught him to recognize. Setting aside his evening coffee, he scanned the tree line with practiced eyes. There, at the edge of visibility, where shadows gathered between ancient pines, stood not the alpha male, but a form he had never expected to see again. The female. Wolf emerged from the darkness with cautious grace, her movement revealing the healed wound on her shoulder, unmistakable evidence of her identity. The mother who Tom had believed dead, the female whose body he had found that March evening in the ravine, now stood living and watching him with intense amber eyes. Her coat had regained its health, her bearing showed strength restored, and her gaze held a focused intelligence that sent a chill of recognition through Tom's entire body. Understanding crashed through Tom's consciousness like spring ice breaking. On Pine Lake, the body he had found, similar size, similar coloring, near the cub's location, had not been their mother but another pack female, perhaps a helper in the communal raising of young. The true mother had been elsewhere, perhaps injured by the same poacher but able to escape further into the wilderness to heal. Now she had returned, drawn by some communication from the alpha male that transcended human understanding. As Tom processed this revelation, the alpha male materialized beside the female, their movements synchronized with the wordless communication of long-bonded mates. Together, they stood at the forest's edge, watching Tom with a shared intensity that felt like communication across an impossible divide. Behind them, partially obscured by undergrowth, moved the now adolescent forms of their growing cubs. The family had been reunited, not through human design, but through the wolves' own remarkable resilience and social structures. Tom realized he was witnessing something few humans had ever seen. Not just wolves as survivors or predators, but wolves as beings with emotional lives and social bonds complex enough to sustain separation and celebrate reunion. Dr. Lawson's voice echoed in Tom's memory. We've barely scratched the surface of understanding their cognitive and emotional capabilities. The evidence stood before him. A family restored against impossible odds, acknowledging the human who had played a role in their unusual journey. Over the following weeks, the mother wolf's return added new dimensions to the already extraordinary relationship between Tom and the Blackridge pack. Unlike her mate, she maintained greater distance, her natural wariness of humans tempered but not eliminated by the unique circumstances. Yet she clearly tolerated Tom's presence in ways she approached no other human, occasionally appearing when he worked outside his cabin or followed familiar trails through their territory. The cubs, now nearly adult size though still showing, the lanky proportions of adolescence took behavioral cues from both parents. They maintained appropriate wariness while showing unmistakable recognition of Tom's unique status. Trail cameras captured remarkable footage of their development, hunting skills, improving under the guidance of both experienced parents, social hierarchies establishing as they grew into their adult roles within the pack structure. By mid-October, Dr. Lawson's research team had accumulated enough documentation to challenge fundamental assumptions about wolf cognition and behavior. Her preliminary papers generated considerable controversy within wildlife biology circles, with some colleagues dismissing her observations as anthropomorphism, while others recognized the significance of the Blackridge case study. What we're witnessing isn't just unusual behavior, Dr. Lawson explained during a presentation at the Regional Wildlife Management Conference. It's evidence of cognitive flexibility and social complexity that forces us to reconsider our entire framework for understanding predator intelligence. These wolves aren't just accepting human presence, they're engaging with it thoughtfully, making distinctions between individuals and demonstrating long-term memory of specific interactions. The mother wolf's unexpected return provided powerful support for Dr. Lawson's arguments. The fact that she had rejoined her family after months of separation recognized the specific human who had intervened to save her cubs and adjusted her behavior accordingly suggested levels of memory, communication, and social understanding far beyond conventional attributions to wild predators. For Tom, the mother's return completed a circle that had begun with those desperate cries in the March twilight. Her presence answered questions that had lingered despite the cub's successful rehabilitation. Now he understood that his intervention hadn't replaced natural wolf family structures, but had instead bridged a critical gap, allowing this remarkable family to eventually reunite and thrive. As November brought the first dusting of snow to Blackridge Forest, Tom noticed subtle changes in the wolves' movement patterns. Trail camera data and direct observations showed the pack establishing winter routines, their territories shifting slightly to optimize hunting in the changing conditions. The cubs, now physically mature though still learning advanced pack behaviors, had fully integrated into the family's seasonal adaptations. One crisp morning, as Tom checked cameras along the eastern ridge, he encountered the mother wolf in a clearing half a mile from his usual route. She stood watching him from approximately 30 yards away, close enough for clear observation, but maintaining wild distance. What happened next would challenge even Dr. Lawson's expanded understanding of wolf behavior. The mother wolf deliberately approached a fallen log at the clearing's edge. With careful movements, she dug briefly in the pine needles accumulated beside it, then stepped back and watched Tom with evident expectation. Her intention seemed unmistakable. She was indicating the location with deliberate communication. Tom approached cautiously, maintaining awareness of his surroundings and the wolf's position. In the disturbed earth beside the log, he discovered a weathered metal object partially buried in the accumulated forest debris, a poacher's trap, illegal in Michigan for decades, but occasionally still used by those who viewed predators as vermin rather than essential components of healthy ecosystems. The implications stunned Tom into momentary stillness. The mother wolf had not only recognized the device that threatened her family's safety, but had deliberately led a human to its location. Whether she associated this specific human with protection or had simply identified Tom as a non-threatening entity capable of addressing the danger, the behavior demonstrated reasoning capabilities far beyond instinctive responses. When Tom returned to the clearing after rendering the trap harmless, the mother wolf had vanished, but fresh tracks suggested she had observed his actions from concealment. That evening, both alpha parents appeared at the forest's edge near his cabin, their brief appearance feeling remarkably like confirmation of a successful exchange. "This goes beyond anything we've documented," Bobby Wilson acknowledged when Tom reported the incident. The conservation officer had begun spending increasing time at Blackridge, his initial skepticism transformed by direct observation of the wolves' remarkable behaviors. "It's not just that she recognized the trap as dangerous. Predators can learn that through experience. It's that she deliberately communicated its location to a specific human she somehow identified as able to help." As winter settled fully over Blackridge Forest, transforming the landscape with heavy snow and crystalline ice formations, the relationship between Tom and the wolf family continued its extraordinary evolution. The parents now occasionally brought their adolescent offspring to the forest's edge near Tom's cabin, behavior that suggested intentional socialization, teaching the young wolves about the complex reality of their environment, including the unusual tolerance of this specific human. December brought Dr. Lawson's expanded research team, now including cognitive specialists and ethologists from major universities. Their carefully placed observation blinds and sophisticated tracking technologies provided unprecedented documentation of the wolves' behaviors while maintaining sufficient distance to avoid disrupting natural patterns. What makes this case so scientifically significant, Dr. Anita Mendez, the cognitive specialist, explained during her initial assessment, is that these wolves aren't habituated to humans in the traditional sense. They maintain appropriate wild behaviors in all contexts, except their specific interactions with Tom. This suggests not generalized tolerance, but targeted recognition and decision-making, cognitive capabilities we've traditionally associated with much fewer wild species. The winter solstice, longest night of the year, brought a snowstorm that transformed Blackridge into a hushed wonderland of white. As darkness fell early that evening, Tom noticed unusual movement patterns at the forest's edge. Not just the alpha pair, but the entire pack, including the now mature cubs and several other adults who had previously remained deep in the wilderness. The wolves emerged from the forest one by one, forming a loose semicircle at the clearing's edge, their dark forms stark against the snow-covered landscape. Their appearance as a complete social unit, this close to human habitation, was unprecedented, even within the unusual parameters of Tom's relationship with the alpha pair and their offspring. For nearly 30 minutes, the pack remained visible, some individuals sitting calmly in the snow, while others maintained gentle movement within their loose formation. The behavior had no practical explanation. They weren't hunting, weren't traveling, weren't engaged in any typical wolf activity. They were simply present, their collective attention focused on the cabin and its human occupant in what felt remarkably like intentional acknowledgement. As Tom watched from his porch, maintaining respectful stillness, he experienced a moment of connection that transcended scientific explanation. This was not about survival or resource management or even unusual tolerance. This was communication, Across an ancient divide, acknowledgement between intelligent species whose lives had unexpectedly intersected and transformed each other. The wolves eventually melted back into the forest darkness one by one, the alpha pair remaining last, their gaze holding Tom's for long moments before they too disappeared. The encounter left Tom with a profound sense that something significant had been acknowledged, though he lacked language to fully capture its meaning. That night, as wind-driven snow created ever-changing sculptures against his cabin windows, Tom began writing what would eventually become his contribution to understanding the extraordinary events at Blackridge. Not a scientific paper. He would leave that to Dr. Lawson's team, but a personal account of transformation, of boundaries dissolved and perspectives forever altered. "I came to the forest as a hunter," he wrote, "believing I understood the natural order and my place within it. I leave that identity behind now, not abandoning knowledge, but expanding it beyond the artificial boundaries we create between human and wild, between thinking and feeling beings and those we've traditionally viewed as driven purely by instinct." January brought researchers from the Indigenous Environmental Network, whose traditional knowledge frameworks offered perspectives that Western science was only beginning to approach. Jason Cloud, an Anishinaabe wildlife biologist whose ancestors had lived alongside wolves for countless generations before European settlement, spent several days observing the Blackridge pack with Tom. "Our stories have always spoken of wolves as relatives, as intelligent beings with whom we share territory and responsibility," Jason explained as they followed distant wolf tracks through fresh snow. Science is just now developing language for what indigenous knowledge systems have recognized for millennia, that animals like wolves possess types of intelligence and social awareness that don't mirror human patterns but are equally sophisticated within their own contexts. This perspective offered Tom new frameworks for interpreting the behaviors he continued witnessing. The wolves' apparent gift-leaving, their territorial communications, their selective interactions with specific humans, these aligned with indigenous understandings of respectful relationship between species who recognize each other's intelligence and agency. February marked nearly a year since Tom's discovery of the struggling cubs, and the forest prepared once again for the transition from winter to spring. The wolf pack's movement suggested preparation for denning season, with the alpha female showing early signs of pregnancy, the cycle of life continuing despite the extraordinary circumstances of the previous year. The adolescent wolves from Tom's rescue, now fully integrated into adult pack life, had developed distinct personalities evident even to human observers. The smallest, once the weakest cub, struggling for survival, had become particularly adventurous, often appearing at the forest's edge when Tom worked outside his cabin. Dr. Lawson's team had designated this Wolf F3 in their study documentation, but Tom privately thought of her as Shadow for her habit of moving like flickering darkness between trees. One morning in late February, as Tom cleared heavy snow from his cabin roof, Shadow appeared at the clearing's edge, her behavior showing unusual urgency. Instead of her typical pattern of watchful observation, she moved back and forth along the tree line, occasionally taking several steps toward the cabin before retreating, behavior remarkably similar to the mother wolf's actions when leading Tom to the hidden trap months earlier. Tom climbed down from the roof, gathering his pack and emergency gear with the instinctive response of someone attuned to wilderness communications. Shadow maintained her position at the forest's edge, watching his preparations with evident attention. When Tom approached within about 20 yards, she turned and trotted into the trees, stopping to look back in what could only be described as expectation. Following a wolf into the forest contradicted conventional wilderness wisdom. Yet the past year had repeatedly demonstrated that conventional understanding failed to capture the complexity of the Blackridge situation. Tom maintained cautious distance, but followed Shadow's distinctive tracks as she led him toward a section of forest he rarely visited. A steep slope of unstable terrain that most humans and wildlife typically avoided. After nearly a mile of challenging terrain, Tom heard it, the unmistakable sound of animal distress. Shadow had stopped at the edge of a ravine, her attention focused on something below. Approaching carefully, Tom discovered the source of concern. Another wolf, one of the pack's older members based on Dr. Lawson's identification records, had become trapped on a narrow ledge after what appeared to be a partial collapse of the ravine wall. The situation's danger was immediately apparent. The trapped wolf lay on a crumbling dirt shelf about 15 feet below the ravine's edge, injured and unable to climb the steep wall. The winter freeze-thaw cycle had destabilized the entire formation, making any rescue attempt hazardous to both the trapped animal and potential rescuers. Shadow remained at the ravine's edge, her behavior communicating unmistakable distress, as she occasionally paced and returned to fix Tom with an intent gaze. The meaning seemed clear even across species boundaries. She had deliberately sought human assistance for a situation beyond wolf capabilities to resolve. Tom assessed the situation with the methodical care of an experienced woodsman. The trapped wolf's position made traditional rescue equipment necessary. Rope, stabilization tools, and medical supplies if the animal had sustained serious injuries. His emergency pack contained basic versions of these items, but the complexity of the situation demanded additional resources. Using his satellite phone, Tom contacted Bobby Wilson, who promised to assemble Dr. Lawson's wildlife handling team and appropriate rescue equipment. The response would take at least 2 hours, during which the trapped wolf's position might further deteriorate as the unstable ledge continued crumbling beneath it. Shadow remained nearby throughout this process, her behavior suggesting she understood. That help was being organized. When Tom approached the ravine's edge again to assess changes in the situation, she joined him at a distance of about 10 feet, extraordinarily close for a wild wolf, her attention alternating between Tom and her trapped packmate below. The injured wolf reacted to their presence with a complex response that reflected the Blackridge pack's unusual circumstances. Initial growls of warning subsided as the animal apparently recognized Shadow and remarkably seemed to calm somewhat. Upon registering Tom's presence as well, the behavior suggested recognition extending beyond the alpha pair to include connection with the specific human who had previously assisted the pack. When Dr. Lawson's team arrived with Bobby Wilson and appropriate rescue equipment, they found a scene that defied conventional wildlife management expectations. Tom had established a secure position at the ravine's edge, monitoring the trapped wolf's condition while Shadow maintained her position nearby, neither fleeing the arrival of additional humans nor displaying typical territorial aggression. "I've been studying wolf behavior for 20 years, Dr. Lawson remarked as her team prepared rescue equipment, "and I've never seen anything like this. She's clearly connected the concept of human intervention with resolving a packmate's distress. That's several cognitive leaps beyond what we typically attribute to even highly intelligent wild predators." The rescue operation proceeded with careful coordination. Dr. Lawson's team included a veterinarian with tranquilizer equipment, though they hoped to avoid sedation given the risks of drugging an animal in such a precarious position. Tom, with his combination of technical climbing skills and the wolves' apparent acceptance, would lead the actual approach once proper anchoring systems were established. Throughout the preparations, Shadow remained present, watching the humans work with evident attention. When additional pack members briefly appeared at the surrounding forest's edge, she approached them with behavior that Dr. Lawson interpreted as communicative, keeping them informed while preventing interference with the rescue efforts. She's essentially serving as translator between species, Dr. Mendez observed, documenting the interactions with professional fascination barely containing personal wonder. Mediating between her pack and the humans she's identified as potential problem solvers. The actual rescue required nearly 3 hours of careful technical work. Tom descended to the injured wolf's position using anchored ropes and climbing gear, approaching the frightened animal with the calm confidence that had served him throughout his extraordinary year. The trapped wolf displayed remarkable tolerance. Of his proximity, perhaps influenced by Shadow's continued presence above, or perhaps recognizing Tom through scent and prior indirect interaction. Examination revealed significant but non-life-threatening injuries, a lacerated paw and possible shoulder sprain that prevented the wolf from climbing but would likely heal with proper rest. Using specialized wildlife handling equipment, Tom secured the injured animal in a transportation harness that distributed weight comfortably while preventing additional injury or escape attempts. The team carefully raised the secured wolf to the ravine's edge, where Dr. Lawson's veterinarian administered immediate treatment before transferring the animal to a specialized transport crate. Throughout this process, Shadow maintained her position at the forest's edge, her attention fixed on her packmate with evident concern. The most remarkable moment came during transfer to the transport vehicle. As the team prepared to move the injured wolf, Shadow approached with unprecedented boldness, moving to within a few yards of the humans surrounding her packmate. Her behavior showed none of the aggression typically expected from a wild predator. In such circumstances, only intense focus and what appeared remarkably like trust in the human's intentions. "She's monitoring the entire process," Dr. Lawson whispered, carefully documenting this extraordinary behavior. "Making sure we're helping, not harming." The cognitive sophistication this demonstrates is revolutionary for our understanding of wolf intelligence. After ensuring her packmate was receiving appropriate care, Shadow retreated to the forest edge, where she was joined by the alpha pair, apparently summoned through communication methods invisible to human observation. The 3 wolves watched as the injured pack member was loaded for transport to Dr. Lawson's facility for overnight observation and treatment. The following days brought further evolution of the already extraordinary relationship between Tom and the Blackridge wolves. The injured wolf was released back to the pack after treatment, with tracking data showing successful reintegration and normal healing progression. More significantly, the pack's behavior toward Tom showed subtle but meaningful changes. Increased visibility during his forest activities, decreased flight distance, and occasional active approach behaviors that suggested not just tolerance, but intentional connection. Shadow, in particular, developed what could only be described as a specific relationship with the human who had now assisted her pack through multiple crises. Her appearances near Tom's cabin became more regular, sometimes simply observing from the forest's edge, other times moving into the clearing if no other humans were present. She maintained appropriate wild caution, but demonstrated recognition and trust that transcended natural wolf-human dynamics. As February transitioned toward March, completing the cycle that had begun with those desperate cubs the previous year, Tom joined Dr. Lawson's expanded research team for a comprehensive review of their unprecedented findings. The documentation, accumulated through direct observation, trail cameras, tracking data, and specific interaction events, had created the most complete case study of wolf cognitive capabilities ever compiled. What we've witnessed at Blackridge fundamentally challenges our understanding of predator cognition and interspecies communication, Dr. Lawson explained as they reviewed the data. These wolves have demonstrated problem-solving, specific human recognition and information transfer capabilities far beyond conventional scientific expectations. Most importantly, they've maintained these capabilities within natural wild behavior patterns, without habituation or dependence. For Tom, the scientific implications remained secondary to the profound personal transformation he had experienced. His relationship with the wilderness had evolved from utilitarian to deeply reciprocal, built on recognition of intelligence and agency across species boundaries. The wolves of Blackridge had revealed themselves not as mere objects of study or management, but as thinking beings navigating their world with sophisticated awareness that included specific understanding of the human in their territory. March brought signs of the alpha female's advancing pregnancy, her movements becoming more localized as she prepared for denning. The previous year's rescued cubs, now fully mature young adults, participated in the pack's preparations with behaviors that demonstrated complete integration despite their unusual early history. Shadow, in particular, showed increasing responsibility within pack structures, often accompanying the alpha pair during territory patrols and hunting expeditions. On the anniversary of Tom's discovery of the struggling cubs, he sat on his cabin, porch at dawn, reflecting on the extraordinary year that had transformed his understanding of the wilderness he had thought he knew. Movement at the forest's edge drew his attention. The alpha pair, emerging into the clearing with the deliberate purpose that characterized their rare direct approaches. The wolves paused at the midpoint of the clearing, maintaining respectful distance while clearly initiating the interaction. Between them walked Shadow, carrying something in her mouth with the careful precision of wolves transporting precious cargo. As Tom watched in wondering silence, she approached closer than any of the wild wolves had ever come to his cabin, placed her burden on the ground, and retreated to join her parents. Tom descended the porch steps with measured movements, maintaining the respectful protocol that had developed through months of extraordinary interaction. What he found left at the clearing's center defied simple explanation: a perfect wolf paw print preserved in a flat section of naturally dried clay, carried from some unknown location and deliberately placed for human discovery. Whether gift, communication, or acknowledgement, the meaning transcended scientific categorization. The wolves of Blackridge had recognized the anniversary of a turning point in their shared history and had marked it with deliberate significance. As Tom carefully lifted the fragile clay impression, the wolves watched from the forest's edge with the focused attention of beings fully present in a moment of connection. That evening, as twilight settled over Blackridge Forest and the first stars appeared above the still snow-covered pines, Tom placed the wolf print on a special shelf he had constructed inside his cabin. Beside his detailed journals documenting the year's extraordinary events, beside the photographs that had captured moments science was still struggling to explain, this simple impression in clay represented something beyond data or observation. It stood as testament to a truth the wolves had revealed through their remarkable responses to human intervention, that the boundaries we create between species, between wild and civilized, between instinct and intelligence, exist more firmly in human conception than in natural reality. The wolves of Blackridge had demonstrated that when these artificial boundaries dissolve, something profound emerges in the space between worlds previously thought separate. As full darkness embraced the forest and the distant howls of the wolf pack rose to greet the night, Tom Richardson stepped onto his porch once more. The sound carried clearly through the crisp March air, voices of animals he now understood not merely as subjects of study or management, but as thinking beings with whom he shared this wilderness. Their calls spoke of territory and family bonds, of hunting prospects and approaching spring, but also perhaps of connection across an ancient divide, a connection that had transformed both wolf and human understanding in the forests of Blackridge. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.